So to begin with, I would like to introduce myself. I am Nikita Ghugri. I'm a co-founder of Xeno Co-lab. We are a service design and social innovation company. We are based in India. And Service Design Halftime is like the new initiative that we have started to bring together service designers from different parts of the world, try to understand what their challenges has been, what their journey has been, and how service design as a field is different in different parts of the world. So as part of this video series, we're going to be talking to around 6-7 experts, this is going to happen like twice a week. And today we are beginning with our first session, and we have our first guest today. He's a senior service designer at McKinsey Design, Christian Lindqvist. So hi Christian, thanks a lot for taking out time and joining us for the conversation. It's always great to chat with you. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So to begin with, can you give a little bit about background about yourself and how has been the journey for you till now? How did you land up becoming a service designer and the kind of work that you're doing right now? How has that been like for you?
Sure. It's been a long journey. It wasn't anything I was planning as I moved into design about 15 years ago, but it's been something that's been very rewarding. I think it was about 10 years ago in 2010 where I came across design thinking. I was working as an art director at a digital agency, we can call it. But we were doing a lot of motion graphics, a lot of video work to be published online. I did have a formal academic design training background, and a lot of that thinking had been lost, and design thinking kind of came up as a package that brought all of that together. And that made me start to explore it a bit more, and I did attend a couple of classes where service design came up. And service design, to me, closely related to design thinking, I think popped up as a field that felt very relevant and innovative, and a lot of opportunity.
Yeah. And how long has it been that you're working in the field of design thinking and service design?
I would say it's been 10 years. I wouldn't call myself a pure service designer. I would say that service design is a big part of what I do.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's been a shift in... I recently went to Toronto for the Service Design Global Conference, and I realized that a lot of practitioners that are service designers are pure service designers. They have a background in business or management, something like that. Not necessarily a design background. So I think for me, service design is... I design a lot of different things. I try to approach everything I design as a service.
Okay.
I wouldn't necessarily say that I follow the strict framework of service design, but I do think that the framework of a service, or approaching it as a service, brings a lot of value and it becomes more interesting.
Yeah. I think what you said is so true. Like a lot of people that you would see has maybe not has had like a proper formal service design education as such, but they have like transformed themselves, discovered this as they were moving forward. And like also what you said about like how service design, you always mix it up with other things, and then whatever you're designing, you try to look at it from the service design approach. So how has been your experience like to use this methodology and this approach in different industries? Because you have worked across different industries, and every industry has their own set way of functioning, set way of thinking. So how has been your experience like industry wise? It could be challenges or the overall experience that you have had while applying such an approach.
Yeah. I've been working with a lot of really big corporations. And I've seen that in the past 5 or 6 years, I've seen that service design has become more and more of a function within these organizations.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because you have uh, these mega corporations, and they create departments that have maybe a CX label or innovation or it's the design department. Uh, it's quite, I think it's quite rare that organizations have integrated service design uh, in different silos, but it rather becomes its own entity.
Hmm.
But I would say that um, fields such as manufacturing, such as consumer products, where innovation is happening constantly, I think I've seen a lot more service design maturity within those fields. Whereas, and I'm not necessarily saying that that's where it's most beneficial to work with the service design approach. But I recently finished a study in the medtech industry, where I think design of medtech devices has a long tradition, but I think the holistic approach of designing medtech products as services with the whole ecosystem maybe isn't as strong a tradition. And I think the opportunities that are popping up there are really interesting.
Right. Also, when you are talking about medtech or healthcare, these are the industries which generally move slow in terms of it could be product development or changes. So, how did you see this kind of an industry you're working with in this space? How easy for you it was to interact with the client, interact with the teams, or interact with cross-functional teams? So, how has been that experience like? And what were like the typical challenges that you saw in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the case of the really the organizations that are really mature in their service design thinking, I think the challenges are very different from, for example, some of the medtech companies that I've seen. When working with teams that are integrated within the company, I find that, I mean, it's so much easier for them to stick with the service for a longer period of time and really follow through. And they typically have much stronger opinions on, they've already accepted a lot of the limitations that might be inherent in the organization. So it becomes very much a mediating role and facilitating role. Whereas when working with these other organizations that are maybe starting to think about customer centricity and how to do customer research, I find that capability building is a much bigger part of the job, and it's always part of it. It's very rare that organizations are willing to let you just go off on your own, which I think is great. We really need perspective of leaders within the organization to take part, especially in the research and the formulation of insights, because then you have them on board and you already see the same thing, and the rest of the process becomes more smooth.
Yeah. So when you say that the capability building becomes like one of the very important aspect of working with such companies, so how, as a consulting company or as a design expert, how do you try to find the balance between like educating the client or building capabilities within their organization, but also at the same time run the project and make sure the kind of insights that you're generating are like taken in a good spirit and taken in the way that is designed to be? And because we have also seen that a lot of times we struggle in just convincing the client that this is the field insight that we have found, and hence this kind of design or this kind of a service makes sense. So this kind of convincing also is like a really, really big challenge. So how do you try to find that balance in terms of capability building and also actually running the project and trying to have the best output that you can?
Yeah. Practice mindfulness, I would say, is the key. I mean, it's a huge challenge, and part of becoming a senior designer, I think, is to accept limitations and to accept that you need to collaborate. I find that design as a field struggles to bring its full value unless it's paired up with, for example, agile. For example, pairing it up with other. I mean, within McKinsey, we have many types of consultants, and we have strategy consultants that we typically pair up with, and it provides a whole other way of getting the bigger picture and becoming relevant and understanding, what you can do now and what you have to wait with for later. So I think it's part of it is realizing that you're not gonna realize your full vision, but rather act the facilitator and be happy with that you've created some motion and left the client with an experience, I would say. But then again, I think it's different in the role that I have, and as a firm, we are typically not able to spend as much time on the same problem as maybe a smaller firm or one person designer running its own business. So it requires finding very different ways of leaving the client capable to take things further. So you kind of leave them with a set of tools or a set of insights or frameworks that allows them to realize hopefully what you've defined together, and then hopefully they come back and say, hey, actually we need your help with this. But oftentimes they don't, because we've tried to set it up that way.
So have you seen any difference between this kind of a approach that you have to play dual roles of, in a way, convincing and educating them, and also leaving them with something that they can take forward or come back to you for further investigation or further work on that? So have you seen any difference across different industries or across different geographies that you work in? So if the mindset and approach of people, regions or clients, is it different, or how do you see that?
I haven't seen that, but I have seen that depending on what level in the organization you work with. So if you're working with middle management versus working with the C-suite of the company, the steering committee, there are very, very different. I try to have very different expectations. So if I'm working more with middle management, there's typically more time to spend together, and you have the ability to align and educate, and you create something together, versus when working with more of the CEO or C-suite of the company, you have these very short moments of showing what you're thinking and aligning on the next steps. And preparations become so much more important in the latter. So you have to really have a super clear story that is to the point. We're not telling any long stories in these meetings, but rather going straight to the point. You need to do this, you need to do that, and then you might get a question. Okay, so why are we doing this? And then maybe you get a chance to explain and you show your research process and your findings and all of these things. But typically you don't get that chance. And if you do present a journey map, then the journey map is stripped of anything that isn't within scope and has probably been through a few iterations with the one client that you're interactive mostly with, so as to be very top down in that meeting that you have. So it's very interesting to do ideation sessions in these. I mean, a 90-minute ideation session that involves bringing the whole SteerCo up to date with the latest thinking on customer needs and the pain points. You're going through some of the opportunities. Ideation becomes more of a download of their thinking, and then you get to go away and do your work based on that.
Yeah, and I think such sessions sometimes also work as a lot of like political uh, pointers where we make sure that all the people are involved. They feel they can like take the ownership of the entire work. So having the entire team together also a lot of times adds a lot of different like intangible values in that as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I
Um,
think just to follow up on your question on geographies, I've been amazed with the whole Corona crisis, COVID crisis that we've seen, the opportunities that come up with working remotely. And I was just in a team where the project manager was based in New York, and then I had a colleague in Helsinki, I had another expert in London, and I had another leader in Geneva working on the same project. So we were all, spread out, and then the client was based both in North America and in Europe.
okay.
Yeah. So I mean, still from similar cultures, but I would say it's amazing how we can collaborate with these tools that we have access to, Zoom, Miro boards, etc.
Yeah.
It's really good, and I can see that collaborating with Southeast Asia wouldn't be impossible either. You have to manage the time zones,
Okay.
and it creates whole new opportunities for working with other parts of the world that previously you had to travel and spend weeks away from home to be able to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's great that you brought up like the how this way of working is changing for everyone now. Like globally, everyone is working now, figuring out different ways of working, figuring out different tools of working, just so that the connecting with the teams or the client is also like coordinated properly. The communication is smooth and transparent and things like that. But from an approach point of view, to like or to approach a design process or to approach any project, do you foresee any such changes taking place, or even it could be like at a team level changes or the management changes, or how you used to tackle a problem before and now how you would. So do you see any change in that approach now, like talking about especially post COVID-19 situations and circumstances?
Hmm. I mean, that's a super, super interesting question. Regardless of COVID or not, I think one of the things that have changed for me recently is have, thinking about the double diamond, if you like that framework, trying to add an activity before the first diamond that would be, mapping out the system or the system that you will be designing for. Uh, Whether that be the organization, whether it's an industry, whether it's relationships in a value chain, etc. I think it's becoming more and more important to scope your design effort in a way that you are able to leave it without it having become a mess that is very hard to deal with. So the better you are at defining the system you will be designing for and scoping the right problem within that system, the more successful you are, I would say.
Right.
I mean, I think the COVID-19 context and working remotely maybe makes that even more important to do in advance because of the distance, and you can't afford the confusion that it creates later on in the project if you're not super clear on the scope within that system in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very interesting that you're saying that before the double diamond, we need to scope out the entire system properly. Uh, so taking from there, do you think as a service designer or as a design expert or as someone who is part of the project, is there any different roles and different personal mindset that we as a teammate will have to learn? Because initially you also mentioned that how along with your design expertise we also need to become like a facilitator where we play different roles with our clients, with our projects. So with this new mindset, do you think as a individual is there something different that we should think of, and we need to try to have that mindset personally?
Yeah. Uh, I mean, on a positive note, one of the most exciting things for myself has been the realization that we're not bound to place as much as we used to be.
Right.
We're not at all restricted to saying, hey, I work within this market and that's where I'm based and that's where I work. It provides opportunity for ourselves and for the people that we design for to be based elsewhere from where they are creating value. And being, like, for example, I've chosen to live where I live because it's close to work and it's close to the subway. Maybe that's, and I do pay a fair bit of extra every month to be able to do that, to have that convenience. And I wouldn't say that within the next 5 years that I would be, if I'm going to be working from home to the extent that I see that I might be doing, that it's maybe necessary. So having the mindset of looking for business elsewhere, collaborating with people that aren't part of your industry in your area, but I think it provides opportunity to work with the people that you like, that you like to work with, that you enjoy hanging out with. So I think that's a mindset. What it means for the people that we design for, I think that's going to be one of the challenges for us to keep up to date with. I wouldn't say that I'm an expert yet at all. I mean, coming out of the study that I just finished for MedTech, the 50% of the people I interviewed were sure that before Christmas at least, they would be back to normal. Everything would be looking as normal. These were surgeons. Whereas the other 50% were sure that, this is a lot is gonna change. We're gonna need new types of tools to learn how to use the new instruments that we are using and do the trainings, etc. So there's this split, and nobody really knows how it's going to turn out. And how do you design for a future scenario that you don't know how it's going to turn out? I mean, it's super hard. And perhaps one of the key levers one of the things to think about is, how do we exit a project in a way that it can grow, that it can continue to evolve without us being there? Because as consultants, we're typically too expensive to have around for the full implementation phase. Those are a couple of things that's on my mind for.
I think it's super hard even to foresee imagine what's going to happen when nobody clearly has much idea what's going to happen, say after 2 years or 1 year, if we can even think of years down the line future. But you spoke about how we need to handhold the clients when we are in the project with them, or how to leave the project so that they have something to work with, clean it at being truly agile in a way so that it can get adopted in a different circumstances later coming down. But how do you think the role of service design, do you think, first of all, do you think that is going to change now, considering the unpredictable circumstances, the change in our consumer at the pace that everyone is changing? In the past few months, I think we as a consumer has completely changed in a different way. So for my first question is, do you think the role of service design is going to change in coming future? And secondly, do you see any change in adoption of such a process within an organization, and also implementing it as much as possible? So do you think there is going to be any change in that?
I believe that it's constantly changing, and let me make a parallel to the field of user experience design or UX design. I have the impression that UX has been transformed. It's becoming more of a commodity than it used to be. I think service design is becoming more of a commodity than it used to be. So I think it's an evolving field in the way that it's becoming more accepted and it's becoming more widely spread. At the same time, it's maybe stepping down a few steps in strategic value, and it's becoming more of a operational tool.
Yeah,
that's how I see it. Another thing that is affecting it a lot is the emergence of other approaches to design. For example, design sprints, and design thinking being paired up with agile a lot. User experience design being paired up with service design, or there's this. I think speaking of it in these different terms creates challenges of itself, and I think they will continue to evolve together. And I think it's definitely a good thing that we're learning from each other. So that leads me to the next part of the question. Is it gonna change with how we, if I got that right, so how does service design interact with organizations?
Yeah.
So I think the interfaces between service design and other parts of organizations will have to continue to open up and evolve. So taking on the vocabulary of organizations, understanding their structures, mapping these systems with even the organization you will be working for, it's going to be super important for impact if you're going to be able to deliver solutions that can then be accepted by these organizations and implemented. Yeah, so we're being bombarded by other disciplines that are also emerging, and that needs to be a part of our thinking.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting. I mean, I completely understand that everyone is right now in the phase of like figuring out things. No one will have like the final answer that this is it, this is the way to go forward. And we are just running short of time. So I just have one last question. That is when we are talking about how like different processes needs to now maybe merge, and then as a person or as a designer, you might have to like switch your roles and like wear different hats to actually execute and run the project. So is there any different team roles that you see are emerging within, say, a design fraternity? Like how a service designer is one person that was working, but are there any different roles that you think might become super important in the coming future because of this cross collaboration of processes, cross collaboration of disciplines is happening? So is there any such some new role that you see might emerge?
Yeah, I think I'm very inspired by agile and product management. It's called in agile. It's how you typically, if you do it right, you have a team of a product owner and a product manager, and the product owner will be managing the building of the digital product and the day-to-day production, whereas the product manager will be much more responsible for customer needs, the strategy of the implementation, and following up on how the product is being received in the market and how to make it grow. And for me, the role of the product manager embodies a lot of the aspiration of some service designers to start thinking more about how can we size the market, how can we be more relevant when it comes to business thinking, and understand how we integrate with business. So there's a lot to learn from that role, and I foresee that design management is an old field that no one's talking about anymore. But I think if there's a hybrid product manager, service design manager role, that is going to be super powerful for bringing all these types of thinking together and to really build amazing things for the future.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting that how all of us, or like our industry is like at a cusp where there are a lot of different paths and streams which are emerging now, and everyone is trying to not only work in a different way to figure out different digital tools to communicate and collaborate, but in our process, in our teammates, it could be the team structure, everything. I think is just at a cusp where everything is changing and evolving in a different way. So I think it's super interesting times to figure out what works the best and share it with everyone.
Yeah, and just a final word on that. I think some of the conversations that we've had at McKinsey Design is like, how do we talk less about design to be able to reach out more with what we can do? Because sometimes the conversation on design itself becomes so important that we kind of lose track of what we want to be doing. and other fields maybe aren't so fond of talking about who they are and what they do, and that's why they sometimes have an easier time integrating.
Right.
The more we can talk about the value we provide and less about how we do it, the more impact I think we're going to have.
Yeah, I think that's very, very true. All right, so we have actually like hit our end time, but thanks a lot, Christian, for joining in and having the quick conversation with us. It was super nice. I personally got to know different point of views, like a lot. Like it was super interesting, and I would wish to like have a second round of conversation maybe again sometime. But it was super nice to chat with you.
Anytime. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Bye. And thanks a lot for everyone joining in to listen into the conversation. It's we hope that you had a great time.
It's a question from Dina Emser. Where can I learn more about the Double Diamond? Look up the British Design Council. Yeah. That's my response.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
you,
you.
Nikita. Take care. Nice to talk to you.
Same.
Bye.
Bye.